Good evening there, everybody. What is happening? Hopefully, you all are having a wonderful day today. So, when it comes down to it, I thought all in all that, of course, I would talk about the French Open win that Mr. Rafael Nadal did end up getting today over the Norwegian player, I believe, Mr. Casper Ruud. And of course, for those of you that know my channel, you know that I talk a little bit about that of the ATP circuit, that, of course, about that of the tennis sport, because I do overall thoroughly enjoy tennis. I think that it is a very, very entertaining sport, at least for me. And of course, for this generation, probably, somewhere around the past 20, years, somewhere around there, we of course have been very, very blessed within this generation to get the big three. And of course, the big three that I am talking about, Mr. Roger Federer, Novak Djokovic, and Mr. Rafael Nadal. But the big question is, of course, who is in what position overall in terms of the GOAT conversation within those big three, especially all in all, now that things have ended up the way that they have been. Roger Federer now has 20 Grand Slams. You now have Mr. Novak Djokovic, who has 20 Grand Slams as well. And now you have Mr. Rafael Nadal, who now actually has two Grand Slams ahead of them. He now has 22 Grand Slams. And his 22nd Grand Slam today ended up being a victory over the Norwegian player, Mr. Casper Ruud. And I was not surprised whatsoever that Mr. Rafael Nadal ended up beating him within straight sets, because I don't personally believe that Casper Ruud, at least from what I see of him right now, I don't believe that Casper Ruud is really an A-plus player. I don't really think that he's anywhere near on the same level as a Novak Djokovic or a Rafael Nadal, even at this point in time in their career in terms of talent. I really don't even think he's on the same level as a Zverev, a Tsitsipas, a Medvedev, a Dominic Thiem from a few years ago. To be quite honest with you, not even 100% sure if Casper Ruud in terms of talent is on the same level as a Auger or Auger Aliassime, however you pronounce his name, or Denis Shapovalov, who I personally believe has been a little bit overrated, but it is what it is. Talking about Denis Shapovalov, that is. But when it comes down to it, I have to give a great congratulations to Mr. Rafael Nadal for winning his 22nd Grand Slam title and also winning his 14th Roland Garros. And I don't think that there is any doubt about it that Rafael Nadal, just like for the past several years, and plus, that he clearly is the most dominant player on the Roland Garros surface. No doubt about it. Now, if you're going to ask me the question, in my view, does this make Rafael Nadal the undisputed greatest men's tennis player of all time? Does this make him overall above maybe a Novak Djokovic or a Roger Federer? Well, in my opinion, when we talk about Roger Federer, just to talk about the big three, I believe that Roger Federer has been surpassed pretty much by both of those players. I don't think that Roger Federer really can be in the conversation with either. I just don't think that there's a lot that he really beats him in, maybe certain statistics, but in my view, he lost too many Grand Slams to the both of them. He does not have a winning record over either of them, and I think that you can argue that both Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic just came up bigger in the bigger spots of their career, especially when they would face each other, between the big three. So it just is what it is. Now, if we were to compare Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic right now is the only one, in my view, that is somewhat in that same conversation with that of Mr. Rafael Nadal. And some people may disagree with that. They may say, well, after this 22nd Grand Slam win, why overall would you not say that Rafael Nadal is the undisputed greatest of all time? Well, the reason why I say that is because Novak Djokovic's career is not necessarily over yet. Now, if you want to necessarily say that Mr. Rafael Nadal maybe is leading the race against Novak Djokovic, I wouldn't say that that would be a huge problem. I think that, that pretty much is a coin toss, in my opinion, about who is that of the greater player. Now, Rafael Nadal does have two Grand Slam victories now over Novak Djokovic, or, he has two more than what Novak Djokovic has. But let's also be a little bit real here. I do believe in this, I'm not a person that makes excuses here, and I'm not trying to make one here. But let's also be real. There was a little bit of extra sauce. There was a little bit of extra help from that overall from the Australian Open when they banned Mr. Novak Djokovic, who overall, just like how Rafael Nadal is as dominant on the Roland Garros, Novak Djokovic is just as dominant on the Australian Open surface. So the fact that they were banning him overall pretty much within the final weeks, that tells me that sun was riding in Denmark. And just taking a look at the Australian government and the Australian media, just looking at overall the things that they would say, they very clearly wanted to give an opportunity for Rafael Nadal to win his second Australian Open title so he could once again be in that greatest of all time conversation. But I still do have to give Rafael Nadal a great amount of credit for winning that Australian Open title, because if we are, also going to be real about Mr. Novak Djokovic, one could certainly debate that he has had more opportunities to win Grand Slams where he did not take advantage, especially in that of the U.S. Open. There have been certain things or certain titles all in all to where he could have potentially won, but he ended up screwing up, especially in that of the U.S. Open, where there was a couple of ones to where Rafael Nadal either did not play because of injury or maybe did not play because of the COVID or something like that, the COVID virus. So Novak Djokovic, what he is going to have to do, in my view, to stay in that conversation with Rafael Nadal, first of all, this year he is going to have to win the Wimbledon title, which I believe more than likely that he will because he probably is the best all around Wimbledon player that I have seen, at least within my generation, when it comes down to it. And on top of that, it would also be nice for Novak Djokovic, at least for his career, if he were to win the U.S. Open. He is going to have to start coming up bigger at the U.S. Open. That is not his preferred surface because the ball tends to bounce a little bit higher and he prefers the ball to bounce a little bit lower from what it seems, where Rafael Nadal, it seems to be the opposite. But overall, Rafael Nadal was able to come up big, even though Novak Djokovic was not there. He was able to come up big against that of Daniel Medvedev, and he was able to win that within 5 sets. So at the end of the day, Novak Djokovic at the U.S. Open, he is going to have to come up a little bit bigger than what he has in the past few years. But I believe more than likely that Novak Djokovic will win the Wimbledon this year. What I will say is this. What would Rafael Nadal, in my view, have to be the undisputed GOAT? Because right now, I don't think that either Novak Djokovic or Rafael Nadal, with how close the race is, in my view, I can't really say that either of them are the undisputed greatest of all time, in my opinion. I think that there's certain things that Novak Djokovic has over Rafael Nadal, and Rafael Nadal, of course, now has 2 championships over that of Novak Djokovic. But in a certain amount of other categories, really in almost every other category, Novak Djokovic pretty much has the advantage. He has the advantage in the days of number one. He has the head-to-head record when it comes down to it. And to be honest with you, he probably would be tied up with Rafael Nadal right now, if not for the Australian government, in my opinion, doing something that was kind of rotten in Denmark. But it is what it is. But all that is speculative. And once again, Novak Djokovic has had his fair share of opportunities. So once again, Rafael Nadal, if you were to claim him right now as the greatest men's tennis player of all time, at least of this generation, there certainly would be no problem with that for me. Once again, I'm a very decently logical and objective person. I'm not a fanboy of any of these guys, but I do believe that both Rafael Nadal and Novak Djokovic, I believe that they're pretty much in that same category. But Novak Djokovic, overall, he is going to have to step it up a little bit more in some of these tournaments, especially in that of the U.S. Open. So we will see all in all what ends up happening. It should be very, very interesting. But Rafael Nadal, what I will say is this. If he does end up winning this tournament this year, I may have to start calling him the undisputed greatest of all time, even over that of Novak Djokovic. If he ends up winning the Wimbledon title this year, especially with Novak Djokovic in there, fully healthy and at full capacity, and if he ends up beating Novak Djokovic, or if he ends up winning the title with Novak Djokovic being within that tournament, I will have to call Rafael Nadal, in my view, the greatest men's tennis player of all time, no doubt about it. If he ends up winning the Wimbledon title, as well as what he did the Australian Open title this year, and also the French Open as well, if he ends up doing that, he, in my opinion, will be the greatest men's tennis player of all time, at least of this generation. And then Novak Djokovic will have some making up to do. So it will be very, very interesting. But that, in my opinion, for this year, if Rafael Nadal want to be called the undisputed greatest men's tennis player out of all 3 of them, or at least out of the 2 of them, because I think that he pretty much has surpassed Roger Federer, same with Novak Djokovic. I think that if Rafael Nadal wants to prove that he is the undisputed men's greatest tennis player of all time, at least out of this big 3, he's going to have to win the Wimbledon title, or he is going to have to win another Wimbledon title. Because I really don't think that there's any debate about who the more complete player is between himself and Novak Djokovic. I believe that it's Novak Djokovic. And to be quite honest with you, I really don't even think that that's debatable. Rafael Nadal does have the 2 advantage now with the Grand Slams, but one also could certainly argue that that was partially due because Novak Djokovic, in my opinion, was somewhat wrongfully banned from that of the Australian Open tournament. But it is what it is, or at least some would debate that. But anyways, when it comes down to it, all in all, we will see what happens. But if Rafael Nadal does end up winning the Wimbledon tournament, which I do hope that he ends up playing in, just to see overall what he can possibly do, then Rafael Nadal, in my opinion, would probably have to be then somewhat the undisputed greatest men's tennis player of all time, at least out of the big 3. He then would have separated himself, in my opinion, clearly from that of a Novak Djokovic. But also to talk about certain other arguments, in my opinion, of what makes Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal right there with each other, is because when you take a look at Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal in terms of the Grand Slams, and I always have these certain people that come in my comments and they say, oh, well, Rafael Nadal, he has the head-to-head advantage in terms of Grand Slams. Well, he does, but if you take a look at it from a different angle, as in basically the amount of the Grand Slams that they have played in, when you take a look at the Grand Slams, Novak Djokovic has the advantage in 2 of the 4 Grand Slams, and Rafael Nadal has the advantage in 2 of the 4 Grand Slams. People basically take a look at the head-to-head record without any context, and they'll basically say, oh, well, Rafael Nadal has beat him in more Grand Slam finals overall or Grand Slam tournaments than what Novak Djokovic has him. Yes, but the main reason why that is because Rafael Nadal is so dominant on the clay surface overall, and Novak Djokovic is also so good on the clay surface that they've met in the Roland Garros several different times. They've not met in the Australian Open several different times. Rafael Nadal, I don't believe, has ever beat Novak Djokovic in the Australian Open. And the only time that he's ever beat Novak Djokovic in the Wimbledon was early on in his career when he really had not hit his peak yet. So that's why, in my view, both Novak Djokovic and Rafael Nadal are right there with each other. And once again, these are just logical and objective points that I am making. But it is what it is. But once again, Novak Djokovic, he is going to have to win the Wimbledon this year. No doubt about it. And he also, more than likely, is going to have to win the U.S. Open. He's going to have to come up a little bit bigger than what he regularly has in that of the U.S. Open. So it'll be very, very interesting. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thanks so much for watching. Congratulations to Mr. Rafael Nadal for winning his 22nd Grand Slam title. Certainly is an all-time great player. Certainly is one of the best all-around players that the history of tennis has ever seen. Very, very incredible to watch an all-time great athlete and player overall and performer like that of a Rafael Nadal. Certainly a pleasure to watch. But anyways, that's really about it. And I think that this race between himself and Novak Djokovic is going to get very, very interesting within the next few years, depending on what ends up happening. So it's going to be very, very interesting. But anyways, that's really about it for today. Thank you so much for watching, and I will talk to you all later, and we'll see what ends up happening in that of the next Grand Slam tournament with that of the Wimbledon. But anyways, that's about it for today. Thank you so much for watching. We'll talk to you all later.